Open your eyes in Rome, 100 AD, and the day begins before you've had a chance to want it to. Hundreds of people are already outside your door, not enemies, clients, people who depend on your political favor and who have been standing in the dark since before dawn just to get a few minutes in your presence. This is the salutatio, a daily ritual in which a Roman senator essentially held court in his robe every morning, walking through a crowd of anxious, flattering people, dispensing small baskets of food and coins called sportuli, making promises, granting requests, and enjoying the spectacle of strangers being very, very nice to him. If you were rich enough, this crowd could number in the thousands every morning. That is what power looked like, and it is nothing like what any of us mean by it today. The theater of mourning and the architecture of status. While the senator worked his crowd, his wife was being worked on. Hair in Roman aristocracy was architecture, a skilled ornatrix. A slave dedicated entirely to hair and makeup might spend hours constructing the elaborate pinned towers that fashion demanded. Pliny the Elder, who found time to write 37 volumes of natural history, apparently also found time to complain bitterly about how long women spent on their appearance every morning. In Egypt, the morning was equally theatrical but spiritually loaded. The kohl that wealthy nobles applied around their eyes was not purely cosmetic. It was believed to ward off the evil eye, infections, and the general malice of the universe. Getting ready in ancient Egypt was technically a religious act. Time in front of the mirror was piety. In Babylon, a wealthy merchant or palace official began his day with a formal structured prayer addressed not to a general deity but to a personal one, a god assigned specifically to his household, whose full-time divine job was to advocate for his interests in the celestial bureaucracy. If things were going badly, your personal god had probably stepped away from his desk. The solution was more offerings, more rituals, and more expense. Being rich in ancient Babylon meant maintaining a private subscription service with a deity, which is either the most ancient form of networking ever recorded or the most expensive one. The homes of the ancient wealthy were arguments made in stone. You entered a Roman domus through a narrow corridor that opened without warning into a large central hall, the atrium, with a rectangular pool called the impluvium set into the floor and the sky visible above it. Light flooded in. The pool reflected it. The whole thing was choreographed to produce a specific jaw-dropping effect at a specific moment. Beyond the atrium sat the tablinum, the master's office where business was conducted, and then the peristyle garden enclosed by columns, filled with fountains and sculptures arranged with obsessive precision. And surrounding all of it were the sleeping cells of the dozens of enslaved people who made the whole thing function. Small, windowless, and stuffy, a detail travel guides about Pompeii tend to overlook. Greek elites in Athens were deliberately restrained on the exterior, since looking too rich on the street was considered socially dangerous and frankly vulgar. But step through the door, and the interior courtyard offered a different world. In Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II, palace officials lived in multi-story mud brick structures with private water systems, cooling towers, and irrigated roof gardens. If you had enough engineers and enough enslaved labor to move water uphill, you moved water uphill, partly because you could, and partly because everyone needed to see that you could. What the wealthy Ate watched and did to their bodies, a Roman banquet was not a meal, it was a performance. Guests reclined on couches because sitting was for servants and people who ate standing in the street. The food was designed around rarity, complexity, and deliberate excess. The cookbook attributed to Apicius describes dormice stuffed with brain, flamingo tongue sauce, snails fattened on milk until they could no longer fit back into their shells, and sea urchins served in garum, the fish sauce that went on absolutely everything in Roman cuisine. Petronius gave us Trimalchio, a fictional but recognizable portrait of a Roman host staging a dinner of escalating absurdity. a roast pig cut open to reveal blood puddings and sausages within, mechanical contraptions lowering dishes from above, zodiac signs carved into every course. At one point, Trimalchio staged his own death so guests could rehearse the funeral. It was satire, but the kind that only works when aimed at something real. Wine operated as its own hierarchy. Falernian, Cacuban, and Massic were the prestige vintages, while cheaper diluted wine went to lower-ranked guests at the same table. The guests at the bottom tier always noticed. The Athenian symposium took a different approach. After dinner, tables were cleared. Wine was mixed in communal bowls according to a ratio the group agreed on, and the evening moved into philosophy, poetry, and kodabos, a drinking game in which participants flung wine dregs from their cups at a target across the room. The archaeological evidence for kodabos is extensive, which means at the height of Athenian intellectual life, the men who funded the Parthenon spent their evenings throwing things at each other. History contains multitudes. Entertainment for Roman elites was not passive. Julius Caesar, before he became Julius Caesar, nearly bankrupted himself funding gladiatorial games and famously left an inheritance of 320 pairs of gladiators equipped in silver armor. The Venatio staged wild animal hunts, required extraordinary logistics. Exotic animals were captured in Africa and Asia, shipped alive across the Mediterranean, and released into arenas. Wealthy patrons sponsored these events, had their names inscribed on monuments, and received political capital in return. The charioteer, Gaius Apuleius Diocles, reportedly earned the equivalent of $5 billion over his career. The Circus Maximus held 250,000 spectators. His patron had made an excellent investment. The Roman body was a project requiring its own staff. Wealthy households maintained private baths with cold, warm, and hot pools, massage rooms, and specialists for depilation, perfumed oil, and hair treatment, all performed on your body by other people whose existence was organized entirely around yours. The strigil, a curved metal scraping tool used after exercise to remove oil and sweat, was wielded by slaves. The grime scraped from famous athletes' bodies was collected and sold in small flasks as ancient celebrity merchandise. People bought it and rubbed it on themselves for beauty, luck, or something in between. Wealthy women had access to face masks made from barley, eggs, and crushed antler, preparations including crocodile dung, which Galen recommended, and crushed pearls dissolved in vinegar. Cleopatra is said to have bathed daily in donkey milk, requiring somewhere between 200 and 700 donkeys milked per day. Egyptian records suggest she traveled with her own herd, which is one of those historical facts that tends to just sit with you for a while. The fear underneath. All the gold, here is what tends to get lost in all the marble and garum. Being rich in the ancient world was structurally terrifying. Ancient wealth had no limited liability, no bankruptcy protection, and no diversified portfolio. If your ship sank, you were ruined. If the emperor admired your home was his. The Roman writer Seneca, himself extraordinarily wealthy and deeply aware of the irony, noted that the rich were often the most anxious people he knew. Every banquet, every sponsored game, every column of marble was not pure vanity. It was the constant purchase of loyalty and goodwill that might protect you when things went wrong. Wealthy ancient Egyptians dealt with this anxiety by spending their entire adult lives preparing for death. Building a tomb, stocking it, and hiring priests to maintain the mortuary cult that would sustain the spirit afterward. This was not morbidity, it was estate planning. The tomb of Ramesses II cost the equivalent of what some modern nations spend on infrastructure. He began building it the moment he became pharaoh, reigned for 67 years, and was still adding to it when he died at 90. And then there is the thing that made all of it possible. Every bath drawn, every meal prepared, every toga cleaned, every garden weeded, every lamp refilled. Pliny the Elder mentions Caecilius Isidorus, who, despite losing much of his fortune, still left 4,116 slaves in his will, listed as property alongside property. The philosopher Epictetus, one of the most influential Stoic thinkers in Roman history, was himself enslaved. Some enslaved people accumulated enough through a personal fund called the peculium to eventually purchase their freedom, becoming freed persons bound to their former owners through lifelong obligations. The ancient world maintained elaborate categories of not quite free, arranged in a hierarchy nearly as complex as the one above them. Underneath every luxury the ancient wealthy enjoyed, and they enjoyed extraordinary ones, sat this foundational reality. The life at the top was built on a foundation of enforced human labor at a scale that is almost impossible to fully process. You cannot romanticize ancient wealth without acknowledging what it cost and who paid. The toga, to end on a detail, was 6 meters of wool that had to be folded and draped just so. Nobody could put one on alone. The garment was architecturally dependent on assistance, which was, of course, entirely the point. If this changed how you think about wealth, power, and history, hit like on this video, subscribe for more deep dives into how people actually lived in the ancient world, and drop a comment with the detail that surprised you most.